This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
The Manage Smarter Show is brought to you by SalesCred, the sales skill building solution that empowers sales teams worldwide to multiply sales opportunities by improving perception, accelerating trust building, and by earning repeat business. Get the best-selling book by C. Lee Smith, download the free mobile app, and now sign up for the SalesCred Masterclasses. Book your session now at salescred.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Lee, our guest today says learning isn't the transfer of information, it is the transformation of the learner, and managers are required to retrain, teach, pass along new lifelong learning philosophies. And
especially in the age of AI, lots of retraining, reskilling is going to be necessary. And it's one area that I've noticed, from my attendance and my people's attendance at ATD, for example, that it's surprising how many trainers aren't really up to speed on the AI thing, haven't really, latched onto it as far as the training. So that's definitely one thing I want to ask about today. And but that is so right, though. The end result is transforming the learner so that help them be able to apply these things in the real world so that they can improve their performance, but also their personal sales and growth and development.
Exactly. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. That is the topic of the day. I am Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I am the CEO and founder of Sales Fuel.
And with some great actionable tips about all of this today, Andrew Barry is our guest. He has an extensive background in learning and development, serving in executive roles at global organizations, including KPMG. Ever heard of that little firm? He's now the founder and CEO of Curious Lion. It's CuriousLionLearning.com, everyone. It's
a much less expensive company.
Yeah. A company that specializes in high performance leadership. Andrew and his team have developed thousands of leaders at clients like Workday, Pinterest, IMG, and USAA. He's won a lot of awards for this. And I'm reading some of your stuff today, Andrew. First of all, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming.
Oh my gosh, Audrey, Lee, it's so great to be here. Thank you for that intro.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that I noticed was your tips for managers who are having to teach. Is you say really the process should be driven by the student, not the teacher, because it forces them into a box where the lessons they learn get stickier. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I love that you started with the bringing AI into this, and I'd like to start there to set some context, because I think I think AI is showing us right now that information is cheap, right? Information used to be power, right? Knowledge is still power, but really, I think it's forced us to think a lot about what is the difference between information and knowledge. We literally have answers at our fingertips now all the time, right? And so, as a leader, as a manager, what role are you playing when you're not the one the information you have is not that important anymore? The answers you have are not that important anymore. And I think where we are leaning is that what's more important is having the right questions. And as a leader and as a manager, to be able to think with that curiosity and that that ability to problem solve and understand a problem from different perspectives is where you provide the value for people to kind of help to navigate this. So to your question, Audrey, about how do we think about developing people on our team as leaders, they are curious about something already, right? And I think a big starting point, a lot of our programs start like this, is find out what that is. Find out what people are curious about. What are they interested in? Where do they want to go in their careers? Then have the conversation about aligning it with the business objectives. But if you can start from that point, you've got a much better chance at that alignment.
I noticed in our pre-show prep this goes back a ways, but you were an editor of a publication called SA Rugby because you're from South Africa, and
That's
South
right.
Africa is a powerhouse in the rugby world.
Yes.
And a lot of us in the United States have it's kind of captured our imagination with what the women's rugby
Yeah.
team, the sevens team, did at the Olympics this year.
Yeah.
So my question to you is like, what compare and contrast, what's required for building a high performing rugby team, whether it's sevens or 15s, and a high
Mhm.
performing corporate team?
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you really this is a great question. And I was just talking to my team about this on Monday. There's a documentary out there about the South African World Cup winning teams. It's called Chasing the Sun. There was one when we won the World Cup 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, and then was another one last year. We won the two consecutive World Cups. And what you see in this show is this documentary is the behind the scenes of a high in an elite team, right? Like they are literally the standard bearers in the sports in the world, which is as a South African is a big deal. Like we're not the standard bearers in many sports, so this is pretty cool. And the reason I think that they're doing this so well, and this is where I think it transfers a lot to the work we're doing at corporates, is there, and I have come around to this idea. I used to think the opposite. It's it's the difference between treating your team as a family or a team, right? And I used to treat my company, my people as a family, and unfortunately, it starts to create some problems down the line. Like, yes, you get great loyalty, you get great, camaraderie, connection, belonging, all of these kind of things, and you don't want to lose those. But there's a downside to the family thing. Not everyone is the same, right? All families are also dysfunctional. There's like a black sheep thing in families. You try and everyone has a black sheep in the family, and rightfully so. That family looks to support that person. Teams can't afford to do that, right? And so that's another difference there. But what the Springbok rugby team has done so well is bring together. I mean, we're a country that's 11 different languages, incredibly different cultures, like very, very far apart. But there's a unity obviously there, and literally in rugby, especially like this willingness to die for the flag, for the jersey. And what they've done so well is create an atmosphere that people can come in as individuals, as very diverse individuals with different cultures, different backgrounds, different strengths, and work together as a team. And that whole team is molded in that it's a team of there's 15 people on the pitch, but it's 30 people, in that squad anyone can step in at the next minute to support the other if someone goes down. And I think that's another big. So I gave you a contrast there of treating in a corporate setting, treating your people as a team, not as a family. And then I think the similarity there that we can draw from it is how to bring people with different perspectives in and aligned on towards the same goal. Because that's when you've got really, really exciting opportunity, I think.
I think the advantage that you have, though, on a rugby team or any sports team is that the goal is very well defined. We want to win the cup. We want to win the championship. That's the
Yeah.
goal. Whereas I think the challenge with corporate teams is that the goal sometimes is not very well defined.
Mm-hmm.
What are we
Yeah.
doing here? What do we really want to accomplish? That we know that we are at the height of our success once we've done blank.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that a lot of leaders, are excellent at defining that and communicating that. Would you agree?
I do. And I think this one thing I think about a lot that plays into this is all of our knowledge, right, is about the past. Everything we know, the answers we have is about the past, but all our decisions are about the future. And
Mm.
so there's a big gap there, right? And that I don't think we're doing a great job as an industry helping people bridge that gap. And that's why I talk about curiosity, is why I talk about adaptive intelligence as these things that say, you're not expected to know the answer, right? But you've got to have a different kind of mindset, a mindset of experimentation and learning and like almost intellectual humility as well. That like I don't know the answers, right? And we don't know what the goal is because this is a VUCA environment, right? And it's ambiguous, and we're
Things that
gonna figure it out
14-year-olds don't
together.
have. They think they
Exactly.
know everything.
Exactly. So
So
yeah, we try to focus on that.
with information being so cheap, like you said, with AI, everything at our fingertips, how do you counsel managers to make sure that what they're teaching does result in working knowledge? of a
Yeah.
topic or task?
Yeah, so I think context matters so much. I think one practical thing people can do, and we see a lot of great success with this, is this idea of the after action review. A lot of in sales teams use this a lot, right? Deal reviews and that kind of thing. Is to really spend the time on that. Like it's often a pro forma exercise, right? Of like, okay, what did we learn here? Yep, yep, yep. We make our list, we're happy, we move forward. And now because we have a list, we feel like it was a good meeting. But nothing actually happens from that. And what we recommend people do is to really sit down and unpack the stories around what happened. So start with the most junior person on the team. What was their perspective on that deal? What did they see? What did they, or whatever? This could be a performance review as well, right? It could be any example. And then work your way up to the most senior person, but get all of the stories on the table and spend most of your time doing that. And it seems counterintuitive because you're like, well, we need to get to some, outcome here of an action we can take. But those things tend to fall out of the stories. It starts to become clear in having those conversations what needs to be done. And so anytime we've piloted that approach, it's been really successful.
You have them tell the stories all together in front of everybody, or do you have them tell the stories privately then so they have the freedom of speaking candidly?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good. I think there's no right answer for that. I think it
Mm.
depends on the context of the situation. But defaulting as much as possible to having it in person. I think you miss so much nuance, and you can't ask follow-up questions, which is also encouraged. Um, yeah, exploring the story behind the story is really the message. Yeah.
It sounded to me, when I was doing show prep, that you were talking about liking to use breakout groups and discussion groups, but with more
Mm.
post-COVID hybrid or all remote workforces and teams, what's your advice for those work arrangements now moving forward in terms of the learning
Yeah.
process, best practice?
That's a great point, Audrey, because it's much harder. It is much, much
Mm,
harder. When we run our programs, we've got some of our programs are all virtual. Some of them we have the in-person component, and that session out of all of them is definitely the best, right? And we try and start the programs with those sessions. But if that's not possible, one thing I have seen work really well is having a cadence, a weekly cadence, maybe it's a bi-weekly, but a regular meeting where the objective is not to talk about specific work, but to use it as kind of a brainstorming, brain trust think tank type session. And engineering teams do this really well, actually, where they'll come and they get to verbalize some of the problems that they're working on that are they're like sitting at the top of the to-do list, but they're the ones you never get to because there's no clear like answer, right? And so you got to like number two, number three, you knock those off, you feel good. But that number one sits there, and it's like these big, complex, open-ended problems. So just setting up a cadence like that and being able to even like what I find is that the first time people have to verbalize the problem to someone else is the first time they actually understand it for themselves, right? And
mm,
then
mhm.
they can ask each other questions and get feedback on it, and it tends to move the idea along. But yeah, that's one of the most practical ways I've seen work.
So when we do a lot of our training here, we use crowdsourcing exercises, we use interview exercises, but basically it's small groups where they get together and they talk to each other, and then we have them come back and do a report out. Great
Yeah.
in person, works fantastically well. We try to do it in Zoom though. Trying to do a breakout room, or multiple breakout rooms in Zoom can be
Yeah.
very cumbersome
Yeah.
and almost daunting. Do you have any advice or how to do that in a remote atmosphere?
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to give me some tips on that. It's definitely something we are constantly trying
Yeah.
to iterate on. It's not easy at all. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, some of the things we are taking into account is getting the pairings or the threes or whatever, getting those groupings right. Trying to do as much as we can up front to understand these people so we can pair them in thoughtful ways. That's easier said than done often, right? Because
For
Right.
sure. And
especially
then they jump
like
around. Sometimes they join late. They get confused. They
yeah,
don't click the
exactly.
right button or whatever, and then they end up in the wrong
Exactly.
group. And it's like herding
Yeah.
cats.
Yeah. Exactly. I totally agree. I think one other practical thing I'll offer is that what we're trying to do more and more of now is to role model or provide an example, right? So is to almost conduct a breakout room as like a hot seat or a fishbowl, whatever you want to call it,
Oh,
live in front of people, so everyone can kind of see. And we ask for a volunteer. We typically try and get them ahead of time to agree, and then we'll workshop their idea. Whatever that breakout activity is, we'll do it together, and I will sort of bring in all the other participants as the facilitator. That seems to be working well. We've just started doing that, and it does seem to like grease the wheels and kind of give people a sense of what we're supposed to do here. Then you send them in the breakouts.
interesting. So is there maybe
Yeah.
another platform other than Zoom that we all aren't familiar with that allows the
Yeah,
breakout rooms like
yeah,
Zoom does, but it's easier?
yeah.
Anybody email us, let us know.
Or
Yeah,
should
no,
we invent one? Or should we?
Million
I think
dollar.
there's an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity there for sure.
I see in the
So I got
show
it.
note. Oh, go ahead, Lee.
No, you go ahead, Odd.
I was just saying in the show notes here, it says, ask me about working at KPMG with dreadlocks. You have a fine head of hair, sir, but I'm wondering why you would have us ask this. I got to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where those notes came in. That's interesting. My team put that in there.
Maybe they're just pranking you.
Oh
I
no,
don't know.
somebody's in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, no. I mean, I think the story, I do tell the story lies in the context of being yourself, being authentic,
Mm,
and also a little bit, in the sense of KPMG actually allowed that, and took the time to understand who I was and what I was doing. And yeah, I spent two of the 12 years I spent there with dreadlocks. So they must have liked something to keep me around for another 10 after I
yeah.
cut them. But yeah, I mean, I use that a lot in the context of being yourself, being an authentic
Mm,
leader, right? Which is, I think, so important. I get asked all the time what executive presence is, and I have such a problem with that term because to me, it's like this nebulous thing that everybody's got an idea of what it means: gravitas, strong communication skill, whatever. And it's like paints this picture of some apps like not realistic human, right? Whereas
mm,
I think a more interesting way to approach this is emotional presence. Like, how can you show up with emotional presence, not executive presence, as a leader? And that means being your authentic self, being vulnerable, being open, but also having a strong point of view. It still has that gravitas piece to it. Um, but yeah, I guess that's what I was doing with the dreadlocks.
That leads in really well to a question that I had. Is I mean, you speak a lot about creativity and the need for it, particularly in learning scenarios. And do people who are neurodivergent, whether it's ADD, autism, anything like that, uh,
Mm.
do they make better learners? Do they make better trainers? Do they make better leaders? Or do they have you?
Mm.
Or do their are their challenges superpowers, or are their challenges challenges?
Mm. I like to think of challenges as superpowers. I don't think it makes people better, and I think that's a problematic framing anyway. I know that wasn't your intention, but
No.
I think it's important to kind of think about that language as well, right? To like, there is no, like, I don't think there's it goes back to that idea of executive presence. There isn't an ideal version of leadership. There is the ideal version of leadership that you have as an individual. And if you have 15 direct reports, you need 15 different leadership styles. Like, you can't
Mm.
be one
yeah.
thing to all these different people, right? But I think your question is incredibly important because to me, it goes back to that thing of diversity and understanding what opportunity or what strength lies in the challenge. I see a ton of value in someone who looks at the world very differently to me, and a team that has people like that on that have a voice and have the confidence to speak up is, I mean, that's a huge advantage to any team.
Yeah. Well, your LinkedIn is real Andrew Barry. It's Barry, everyone. And Bazarudo is your Twitter, your
Yeah,
X.com.
that's an old nickname probably from the dreadlock days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bazzaruto. We got a few minutes left. Lee, you want to take the last question?
Yeah, I sure
Okay.
do. So another thing that I see sometimes is that training is the answer to screw ups. I say,
Oh,
oh yeah, you really
yeah.
messed that up, or you need more training on blank. And my
Mm,
concern is, and particularly having been on the other end of that, is that it feels like training is more of a punishment than an opportunity to get better and to improve. And
mm.
what advice can you give to managers or to leaders about framing training, in a manner in which it can be heard and appreciated?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think you go look at any recent survey of why people choose jobs, certain jobs over others, or why they choose to leave jobs. And it's usually like one or two, but it's usually in the top three things is career growth, right? Development. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, where training has this bad rep in many cases that it's like remedial and it's there to correct the problem. But that just assumes that's also like, I think, indicative of the fact that it's so like it's seen as a one-off thing, training. And what I would recommend for leaders and managers out there is to take all of what I've just said into account and to first of all position training as an ongoing process, right? And to tie it to the career development of the individual. Going back to what I said earlier, like really spend the time to get to understand what they want from from their careers, and then provide those opportunities. And when you and that ongoing learning is kind of growth mindset, right? So like go and try something, take an action, do a controlled experiment, fail, in inverted commas, but learn something. Use the deliberate practice principles to actually now go and do something different after that. And I think as a leader, if you can get your team doing that, they become these learning machines. And then your team, talk about that horrible buzzword we all use, synergy. Like your team is just going to get better and better if everyone on that team is learning autonomously, right? Like what a ideal state.
That's a perfect way to bookend this episode. Like we sort of came right back to where we started. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
CuriousLionLearning.com, y'all. And if you want to reach out to Andrew, please do. This has been great. Thanks for the tips, sir.
Thank you. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.